Good afternoon and welcome to Freight Forecasting. I'm Michael Vincent, Freight Forecaster here at FreightWaves on this beautiful Thursday, and I have a special guest, Mr. Jason Miller, Associate Professor of Logistics at the Eli Broad School of Business at Michigan State University. I did say Broad correctly. That's what it is, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Excellent. How are you doing today, Jason? Thanks for coming on.
No, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. No, it almost was demanded after our discussion going back and forth on LinkedIn from, I guess it started last week, going back and forth talking about the freight markets and what's going on, right?
No, we had a very good discussion. I mean, I think the great thing is we showed that you can have a very nice debate online and be civil. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. You can actually be civil and nice to each other. And actually, you know, I think we agreed on things more than not. As I explained to a couple of people, you know, we come at it from two different backgrounds, two different perspectives, but really what we were saying was very similar to each other's points of view, just kind of looking at it from a slightly different angle is the way I took it. But so let's jump into it here, Jason. It's an interesting time. We had a really good discussion the other morning, you know, that kind of set this up, talking about what's going on in the freight markets. And if you guys will, Cody, if you can pull up the dashboard for everybody to see. I have pressed F11, so it will look nice. So, Jason, just let me kind of set the scene here of what we're looking at and what's going on. So, on the left-hand side, we're looking at outbound tender volumes as we measure them here at FreightWaves, and we're at record levels. You can see here on the 10th, 11,482, or actually 11,489. 71, and this is well above not only 2019, which is here in the green, but 2018. And if I take this out and show it as a full year, you can see that this is higher than the peak of 2018 right now, right? And we've got these massive volumes, and during the same period over here on the right-hand side, and I can kind of stretch this over a little bit, what you're looking at over here here's 2018 spot rates. Okay, leading into June and then into its peak, which we're well above already, which I showed over here, which is actually right here still. And then you see 2019 and you see 2020 right here. The rates have broken above 2019, but they're pretty even with them right now. And so the question is, when you look at these type of volumes and the rates are only here, if I look at outbound tender rejections as well, here's our outbound tender rejections right now sitting at 579, 502 last year, almost 25% in 2018. And that's the extreme demand on capacity, right? And so there was less capacity, there was much more optionality for the carriers. Spot rates went through the roof. And that's kind of where we're sitting at right now, Jason.
Yeah, no, I think right now it's trying to figure out where the tea leaves are going. I think one of the biggest challenges is spot rates are seasonal. So June, we're always going to have high spot rates. I mean, that's something that we typically see.
Yeah.
And so right now the challenge is separating out this rate bump that we're seeing. How much of that is just regular seasonality versus how much of that is true trend?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how much of it is seasonality? How much of it is capacity fall? Demand on that capacity. One of the things that I talked with Zach before we get into this first point, because I really want to talk about these contracted rates and the bids that we were discussing. But just really quickly, I was talking to Zach Strickland, who is our Director of Freight Intelligence here, about the differences that were there. And even this year, the differences. Like, you had extreme volumes early on as the pull forward came, or the panic buying, or preponomics, as Anthony Smith, our lead economist, called it. And there was a lot of there was a rise in spot market rates and a rise in outbound tender rejections, or loads being dropped and lots of optionality going on. but we're seeing high volumes again, but not the same reaction in the outbound, in the rejections and the rates. And I contend that it was more that market was so sudden and so fragmented, and carriers were going into areas they don't normally do. They're more irregular routed than they are right now when you're talking about restocking or of inventories or pressing the primer ball for industry. What's your take on that?
No, I would agree with that. I think that the key thing is why does freight get rejected? One of the biggest things is that carriers are looking and saying, I can't make money hauling that, or I can't, get a truck in there within the windows that you have. My guess is if you start taking a look and you could really drill down in the data, one of the reasons we saw that huge spike in tender rejection in March was the fact these were probably really short tender lead times, right? And so carriers are saying, I can't get a truck there. I don't have a driver that I can get there reasonably well. But I think you're bringing up a key point of, again, to me, when I think of tender rejection, a lot of it is it unplanned? Is it something that is beyond the ordinary? Because, I've got a tight network. I don't want to be running a lot more freight from A to B than I'm used to running because I'm not going to get backhauls out of B. And so now I'm deadheading. And even though you're giving me more freight, that's going to lead to my costs being higher. My thought is that a lot of the volume that we're seeing now is probably fairly predictable lanes, and or carriers have had enough time to sort of start setting up backhauls out of those destinations if it's volume well beyond what they were originally expecting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They're more regular routed, or they've become regular routed by changes in those carriers' routes, as you mentioned. I would agree with that as well. And I did look up really quickly why you mentioned the TLT, or the tender lead time, which is the number of days between tendering a load to a carrier and pickup. And indeed, in March, it definitely bottomed out. It bottomed out somewhere in the 2.5 day range, which is pretty tight compared to almost 3 days in middle of April. So that would bear out with what you were talking about. So as everybody's trying to understand what's going on in this recovery, Jason, we can get to some of the economic numbers that have already been released, and there's some that are coming out. I believe on the 16th, we've got orders and production, et cetera, coming out. There's something else that's going on out there in the market with the shippers and the carriers that could lead to some issues when we start talking about Q3 and Q4, and if we have a strong recovery or a strong market in or even a weak market, I guess, in Q3 and Q4, right?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And that big issue right now is we're starting to see a lot of shippers want to move forward those procurement auctions and try to lock in rates. And I was just actually checking before we started, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics just did release the producer price index numbers for trucking, and May is down substantially from April. And so and that's really capturing contract prices. So I think we're already starting to see a little bit of those effects coming to fruition.
Yeah, so what they're doing, I mean, rates are down right now, so they're looking forward ahead, right? Shippers are looking forward ahead and saying, hey, if this recovery takes fire and we start losing capacity through, if capacity starts falling out, I need to lock in lower contract rates. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to avoid it skyrocketing on them in the fall.
Yeah, no, exactly. At least my experience is a lot of the dynamics with the shipper is, okay, the market's weak. I've got my auction planned in, let's say, July. I might as well start planning on moving it ahead a little bit because I can see the spot market's weak. I can take that as an indication that there's plentiful capacity, and I'm going to lock in low contract rates for the next, 6 months, next 12 months.
And that sounds, on the surface, it sounds extremely reasonable, right, Jason? I mean, that's what I'd be thinking. Let me try and lock these things in now while they're low, and the carriers are accepting this type of stuff. But what are the dangers? I mean, when you start thinking this through, that spells some dangers, really, for both sides, does it not?
Yeah, so I think I'd look at it as there's danger from a relationship standpoint, and then there's danger from a routing guide standpoint. From the relationship standpoint is, let's be honest, that appears incredibly opportunistic. You can sense there's blood in the water, and you try to go in and, essentially you're trying to leverage down your contract prices by taking current market conditions and trying to incorporate that.
Yeah.
So that's something that will breed a lot of distrust with carriers. We
Well,
saw that heavily.
now, just one thing, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, that's pretty much what goes on every bid season, right? The shippers are looking for reasons to try and depress rates and so on. We saw that 2018 into 2019 when we saw the dump in the outbound volumes and so on, and spot rates were really low or coming down at that time. They took advantage of that, but this is different because they're trying to pull into a bid season that's not. It isn't bid season right now, right?
No, exactly. I mean, some people do bids different times of the year for really kind of whatever reason, but yeah, I mean, it's a pattern that we see over and over again, but it's also a pattern that ends up creating a lot of distrust, for lack of a better term. And so I think if you're a shipper and you're looking and saying, look, I want long-term relationships with a core set of carriers, one of the worst things you can do is have, this type of behavior where you either move forward your auction if times are tough for carriers, or you do like we saw in the latter half of 2017 or in early 2018 was shippers saying, hey, I want to push back my auction here another 3-4 months, hoping that the market would cool down. So the one thing, I always teach when we're doing exec ed is find a time to do the auction that works well for you. Do the auction at that time of the year regardless. It's consistency. Sure, you may lose 0.5% here, but in the long run, you actually will gain out.
Gotcha. Now, if you'll bring up the screen again, or the sonar charts again, Cody, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. So let me change this around a little bit. I've got outbound tender rejects and then the spot rates for the U.S. And you can see how they predict each other. But what I want to do is I want to change this out and look at the spot rates for the nation, the spot market rates for the nation, and then I'm going to pull up a trend here, or seasonality study, I should say, Jason, and kind of talk to this, because what I'm going to bring up here is going to have 2018, 2019, 2017 on it. And that may be a little bit too much. If I pull this, you think that looks okay, or should I? Let me see if smaller fonts actually make that better, because we've got so much on here. But I guess what I want to discuss is you made some strong points in kind of relating this between 2017 and now in 2016, and kind of the dynamics that happened there. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that the danger kind of going into the second issue of do shippers have to worry about if they get too aggressive right now in locking in low contract prices, is what you'll run into is that we've seen substantial reduction in capacity. I mean, we know that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics employment data. We've seen somewhere around 6% of the entire trucking sector. Now, that's truckload, that's less than truckload, and that's also including back office personnel. But somewhere around the realm of 6% of capacity is gone since February on a seasonally adjusted basis. So the concern you run into is you lock in low contract prices now, but let's say they're so low they become unrepresentative of the market in 4 or 5 months. If we start to see demand continue to come back, but capacity lags that. And so you then start setting yourself up for rampant routing guide failure in the latter half of the year. Now, where I would say that the dynamics now are different than 2017 was in 2017, if you were looking in late spring, early summer, so April, May, June, you could see very strong manufacturing numbers. So ISM's manufacturing surveys were very strong. The industrial production data from the Census Bureau was very strong. And so you could get a sense that we were in a manufacturing and industrial rebound. We're not seeing that right now. I mean, the data that we've seen for May is still not good. But the difference is we've seen again, 6% decline in capacity. And so we could be setting up for the same outcome, but through a different channel.
Yeah, agreed. So you've got 6% of the capacity that has dissipated, I guess, or gone away. Are we not still in danger of more of that going away, even though we're seeing a bit of a recovery? I mean, the economic data, I agree with you 100%. I'd like to try and be optimistic. I want everything to come back, but it's really the economic numbers were just a lesser degree of really, really terrible. And there is some positive, I guess, less negative vibe in there in some of the fusion indexes, but we'll see what the next one holds. But during this recovery with the PPP that has propped some companies up and many of them trucking, I know a disproportionate amount did not go into the trucking industry, at least on the first round, but there's those that are propped up. Can they survive through this, or are we looking at more failures coming even through the recovery that could exacerbate this problem if the recovery is strong as we're all hoping it's going to be? Case in point, the BMO numbers, or Bank of Montreal numbers that John Kingston reported about a couple of weeks ago, is the number of write-offs and impaired loans has risen 40%, and those were, in particular, those were U.S.-based small to medium fleets.
Yeah, no, that right there is a very serious concern about, once we're beyond the Paycheck Protection Program loans being there, will we start seeing a lot of failures? The one thing I always, when recessions happen, we see, demand go down. The one thing is, though, is it's not spread out evenly, right? You're going to have some carriers, let's say, that are very oil field centric, that have seen 40, 50% of their demand disappear.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult for them to stay in business.
Yeah, we just saw one go out of business like a couple of weeks ago. Flatbed carrier. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what we have to recognize is that there will be some carriers that coming out the other side of this, they will be stronger. They happen to be serving, customers who have seen substantial increases in freight, and they happen to have a network that fits very well. We're, I think, going to have a challenge. The industrial-focused carriers are going to be, I think, harder hit than anybody else right now. Those who are serving major, e-commerce retailers, or they're handling that middle mile for e-commerce, those carriers are, at least as of now, going to be okay. My biggest concern is what happens when we reach August 1 and extended unemployment benefits dry up. Because part of me is wondering if a lot of the volume that we've seen and a lot of the retail demand is not essentially a pull forward because we've given $1,200 stimulus checks to a large percentage of Americans, and we've given more generous unemployment benefits to those who, unfortunately enough, have lost their jobs. Do we see a change in consumer behavior that takes place here in 6-7 weeks once we've stepped outside of that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a real concern, and I think on the flip side of that is not only is there a danger of those, like you said, the extended benefits and the PPP coming, running out and a change in consumer habits, as you put it, but a change in employment sentiment as well, or direction as well, because and I've spoke about this a couple times, was it changed and extended the timeline to fulfill that PPP, and it's not the number of employees, it's the amount or percentage of that loan that you spend on those employees, right? And so if you've doubled the amount of time that you have to account for those dollars, you've in effect cut the number of employee heads that you have to maintain in half, no?
That's a very good point. I'll admit I haven't looked quite as much into the details of the PPP program as I probably should have. But I think the key thing that we have to remember right now is the fiscal response that we've seen to this recession is completely unprecedented, both from Congress and from the Federal Reserve. Yeah. And so we're working in, we have no model to go from. And so, this is Keynesian economics on steroids. And we just don't know what's going to happen at this point.
Yeah, agreed. And trying to make sense of this. I mean, the most useful things that I look at are for at least the transportation industry and for in logistics is really short-term tactical moves and trying to make sense out of where some of these directions are going with the the industrial numbers, the production numbers, the order numbers, the ISM, the different Fed regions, their diffusion indices, et cetera. I just brought up a chart that has the unemployment rates going back a number of years to illustrate just how bad this is. And Cody, if you could bring that up, I know. Jason, you had posted some things today about the latest unemployment numbers. I apologize, but I didn't get a chance to read those. I have them saved. I'm going to go through that, but can you kind of talk through what you were talking about on that post, looking at the recent unemployment numbers that show? I guess well, I'll let you kind of talk to it.
Yeah, so I think the thing when we talk about unemployment, there's two sets of indicators that are used. So the data that's up right now is the monthly data. And so this is collected monthly through a survey done by the Census Bureau of about 60,000 households. And the one thing to keep in mind was these numbers are historically very bad, but there's a reality. And again, I want a recovery just as much as anybody. But the reality is that 13.3% is more like 16.3% because there was the last 2 months, there's been a lot of systematic measurement error that's never occurred before because the fact of people being furloughed due to a disease has never happened before like this.
Right.
And so the numbers should have been about 19.7% in April and then 13.3% in 16.3 in May, which actually explains why the May numbers were an improvement, was because we had already been so badly put in such a bad position in April, we kind of had to go up, for lack of a better term.
Right. So that's the trend hasn't changed. It's just the degree of unemployment that you're talking about that really was higher, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So the market got way ahead of itself, as an example, last Friday with the numbers, and that was due to this measurement error issue, which could be one reason that we've seen the market correct itself a little bit today. But the other, yeah, I mean, my wife used to be in corporate finance, so I know she's happy she's not in corporate finance right now on a day like today. But the other data set is weekly data that comes directly from the unemployment claims, and that's essentially state-level data that's being aggregated nationally. And so there's two sets. There's the initial claims data, and then there's the continuing claims data. To me, the continuing claims is the more important series because that's measuring people who have been on unemployment now for essentially 2 weeks or more. That number is over 20 million. It's at 20.9 million. But what's disturbing to me is for the week that ended Saturday, May 30th, we only saw 339,000 folks come off of unemployment on a net basis relative to the prior week. And most states are heavily opening up right now. I mean, we're not seeing the unemployment claims numbers decline like I think we thought. No, again, there are some that are saying, well, this could be due to the more generous benefits, and some people may not have an incentive to go back to work until July 31. We'll find out about that in about 6 weeks. But Americans like to work. So I cannot, in my mind, imagine that's that substantial of a percentage. So to me, that is the number that I keep watching. And if I don't start seeing that tick down, I'm going to become very worried.
Gotcha. Yeah. So the continuing claims. I mean, it was a little. I mean, I guess it's relatively flat when you're talking about 20.9 million, and it only came down. What was it? 335,000. I think it was the number.
Yeah. So I mean, that's pretty steady, and that to me is the biggest disturbing thing, especially looking at what happened with the Great Recession. Right? We always talk about that being a jobless recovery. the worst thing we could have happen is for this situation to also be one of those quote unquote jobless recoveries.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a solid point. I don't like it, but it's a solid point. So we have about 4 minutes or so left, Jason, and when the next economic numbers come out, I'd love to have you back, and and maybe have you on here with our lead economist Anthony Smith. I think it would be a very interesting conversation, because we've really only got one data point since what we hope was the bottom in the economy, right? So it'll be a little bit more telling, I would think. But I'm going to bring up really orders and production right now, and it doesn't have. So the latest ones come out. What is it? June 15th, June 16th, I think it is.
Yeah, so we'll get from the Census Bureau, from the M3 surveys, we'll get retail, production, and wholesale data. So production, sales, we'll get some inventory data. The inventory is like 2 months, so that's for April. But for me, the industrial production data is what I really want to look at, to see how much we were starting to come back online by middle of May. And then we can start to see what this, the industrial side of the recovery is going to look like.
Yeah, so Cody, if you can bring up the screen, I've got on the left-hand side, I have the orders data, and the chart is the orders non-defense capital goods excluding aircraft, and on the right-hand side is the industrial production number, the IPROG numbers, which it's durable manufacturing. I could pull up any one you want if you care to change this at all, but just to show people what the degree of drop-off was here. These massive cliffs, and if you pull this out, there's a year look. If you pull this out to a 5-year look, you're looking at this rise and this drop off. It's been a massive drop off in both of these, and so as we move forward, hopefully these things are going to move forward. Did you mention those that you look at? Which are the ones that are your key indicators inside here? I mean, you look at all of them, I'm sure you do, but there's got to be your favorite or your go-tos that really give you a strong sense.
So for me, I love the new order series. That's a good one. I not only look at the industrial production for durable manufacturing, but just the broader industrial production that also includes mineral extraction and oil production. Because from my standpoint, oil production is an incredibly important industry in the United States. And it's a huge user of, metal bending companies. So when we start thinking about what's affecting industrial demand, oil production is very high on that list. So to me, I not only like to see, production from a manufacturing standpoint, but also get a sense of adding in that the oil data that's going in there as well, and as well as the mining data. And so there's an even broader series than this one that I focus a lot on.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And so, how much? If you look at these, if you look at the last ISM numbers, right? And that was kind of one of our discussions, I guess, on LinkedIn or whatever. But do you see those numbers, those quick blips or less terrible diffusion indices as being terribly important to you right now, or are you seeing anything that would lend you to believe that we're going to see better orders in production?
I definitely think production will be up. I cannot imagine production wouldn't be up. To me, the series I'm most interested in from ISM is new orders, because that, I think right now with the increased discussion of we are in a global recession, is if we don't start seeing that new order series look better, that is going to start raising my concern that we've got the fact production was shut down for a few months. We've got some backlog, right?
Yeah.
That we can start producing. But if we don't see new orders pick up, then once we're through that backlog, then we're starting to look at temporary layoffs moving into permanent layoffs. And to me right now from ISM, it's about the new order data.
Gotcha. And I'd love to have you back when we do that. We're out of time, Jason. I appreciate you coming on so much. Hopefully this recovery goes smooth. There's a lot of hurdles, a lot of things to be looking out there, people. So, Jason, until next time, my friend, and everybody out there, peace and love. Hope all is well.